Okay, we're live. We are live. We are live, family.
What's up, fam? We are live. We are in the building. Hope everyone had a good time. Let me turn down this music just a tad bit. All right. Can we hear? Are we good to go? Can we hear? All right. So let's just if you guys can hear us in the chat, in the comments right now, see if you can hear us. If you're in the building.
Got a little natural sound in the background.
Yeah, got a little natural sound. Can we go to the picture? Not the
To the
picture, sorry.
picture.
The
Okay,
crowd. Okay.
there we
Yeah,
go.
there you go.
As you can see, let me know ETM has been here streaming live.
All right, so let's see. Are you going? Got the double screen popping off? Okay. So yeah, family. So we were actually going to sit down and speak with Chris Lodgson and Samuel Brown. Unfortunately, they had to break out, but we're actually going to try to do a recap of what happened today. So thanks everybody for coming. Thanks Natalie, appreciate it that you can hear us. And just let us know what y'all thought about today. Turn the public comments. I know there was a big back and forth about who descendants should be called, what we should be called. That was very thanks, brother Marcus. Appreciate you, fam. Um, yeah, that's very interesting. Okay, so somebody said, why isn't the live chat available for those who cannot be present for yesterday's ETM video? Um, I'm hopefully I'm pronounced it if it's LeBron, I think LeBron or something like that. I'm assuming you're talking about the Blue Jeans chat. I know they. Okay. Okay. So yeah, that was somebody who was coming through saying what's up. Sorry about that. Anyway, so yeah, in terms of your question, I'm not sure if you're referring to the YouTube chat or if you're referring to the Blue Jeans because they no longer have the Blue Jeans chat. So that's been disabled because we're in a public forum. So answer hopefully that does answer your question. But I'm gonna give it over to my partner Kim just to see what she has to say about what's been kind of going on. And I don't know why she's putting me on the spot and on the camera, but hey, it is what it is. This is what we do. You behind the scenes on what it looks like and how we're trying to give the information to you, family. And so, no, I'm asking about your video from yesterday. Why isn't the live chat available for those who cannot be present? Yeah, unfortunately, I wish I can answer that question. Um, I'm not too sure from yesterday. Yeah, so well, you're not right here. You can chat now, so go ahead. Chat away. Say whatever you feel. Anyway, I'm gonna give it back to my partner Kim, who's gonna be in the building. But yeah, hopefully we can get with Samuel and Chris. Maybe we'll get some other people. Um, I don't know. We might do it this Sunday if we have some time. Just give the recap, see what's going on, or not. But the task force is still getting ready, as you can see, mingling around, doing what they're going to do. So hopefully they'll be starting soon. But I'm going to give the mic up to Kim.
Hey, everybody. So, just like Moy said, want to know what you guys thought about today's task force activities. I thought that the public comments were just on fire. And speaking of our oh, is yes, okay. So speaking of public comments, like LeBrian is saying here, the comments in our chat were fire this morning. We had our members of our CJAC family come through, making come throughs, and people were just very unapologetic in letting the task force know how they felt and what needs to happen moving forward in order to get the word out to more people about this historic movement that's taking place right now. So, coming up after the lunch break, we're going to be going over the communication engagement piece. So we're all looking forward to see what happens there. Hopefully, after this, we'll be able to go full fast with the mass media and getting this information out to the community. All right, it looks like that we're about to convene, Sam. So, see you on the flip side. You want to play it?
So if you were to bring the black share of wealth at least to the black share of the population, it would require an additional at least $10 trillion.
Yeah, I texted to turn the microphone off. Okay, great. Hello, hello. We'll be calling the meeting into order. It is 2:05, and before we reconvene, I'll turn to Parliamentarian Johnson to establish a roll call vote for quorum.
Thank you. I will call the roll to reestablish whether or not a quorum exists, beginning with Chair Moore,
Present.
Vice Chair Brown,
Present.
Member Bradford, Member Grills, present. Member Holder, here. Member Jones Sawyer, Member Lewis,
Present.
Jones Sawyer, Tamaki, here. Member Montgomery Stepp,
Here.
Member Lewis,
Present.
Member Tamaki, here. Member Montgomery Stepp,
Here.
Member Bradford.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Madam
Chair, quorum has been established. There are 8 members present.
Thank you.
Have a
Since
quorum,
AB
there must have
3121
5
passes,
members.
meeting is now called
Quorum
back
has been
into
established.
order.
Reestablished.
We will. Thank you. Since AB 3121 task force meeting is now called back into order. Item number 17. We will
Community
turn
engagement
to
plan,
the next item on our agenda, which is item number 17. Community engagement plan, update and discussion regarding agreement. Member Grills, you're recognized. You may begin when you're ready.
Having a little discussion off to the side. When we changed the time, it made it difficult for Professor Stoll to join for this conversation. He's actually at a conference in Boston and presenting. He's literally on the panel for this conversation right now. But he's actually at the conference in Boston and there presenting. He's literally on the panel right now. But he's also been so as they'll try to work on it. I'll say that the access code was not recognized at interest of time. So as they'll try to work on it, I'll go ahead and get started. Interest of time.
The host has not yet arrived. Please stand by. The host has not yet arrived. Please stand by.
Professor Stoll was going to do this presentation update on the activity lunch center with me. Stoll was going to do this, so hopefully he will be update on the consider this activity lunch center with me. The things that they have accomplished, hopefully aligned with their this as an update on. First, I want to say that what does their contract consist of? Contract. And so the elements are listed here. First, I want to say that what does their contract planning for the listening sessions? So the elements identify the anchor organizations. They are to do the planning for the contract listening sessions. Project consultants to coordinate organizations, activities and planning. To the logistical support community listening sessions, particularly with reference to activities sure that the resources that are in the budget are available to them. Listening sessions, particularly with development of ancillary materials, resources that are in the budget are available to them. Preparing a survey to administer to participants in the listening sessions, creating a website, and creating a virtual platform so that people could submit comments and testimony, audio and or video. They were also to contract with communications consultants, and then they have 3 deliverables. The deliverables are analysis of the testimony and identification of themes emerging from the comments at the listening sessions, administering a survey and tabulating the results, and then drafting 1 report to be published after the conclusion of all the listening sessions, synthesizing the comments, chronicling the harms, and sharing out the recommendations of the listening session participants. So where are they at? In terms of the organization's independent contractors, communications firms, they've all been approved as vendors by UCLA. The approval process is not under the purview of the Bunch Center. We have to understand that UCLA is a highly bureaucratic institution responding to the high level of bureaucracy in the state of California, which means that nothing happens quickly. It just does not. In terms of the listening session facilitator, Ama Nyameche has been selected and is actively working as the listening session facilitator. The anchor organization convener and organizer, Attorney Mary Lee, is in place and working. The anchor organizations, in terms of their specific vendor contracts, and UCLA doesn't do subcontracts or grants, they're doing vendor contracts. The vendor contracts are in place for 3 of the anchor organizations, which you see listed there on the screen. And then the vendor contracts are ready and operative for what were our 2 communications firms. I will say now and just hold discussion about it till the next agenda item, but AB Partners has resigned as one of our anchor or as one of our communications firms. I'll explain why later. In terms of the organizations in progress, meaning their vendor contracts are not finalized, that is the case because pending required documents have to be received by UCLA, and that reflects 3 of the anchor organizations that you see on the screen. So, in terms of the grant contracting process, if you understand not just UCLA, but universities in general, what the timeline and the process is for doing contracts, UCLA Bunch Center actually was operating almost near warp speed. And I can say that having done 20 plus grants in my own university, which is not as bureaucratically complicated as UCLA's, but it has its own layer. I can say with fair certainty that they've been operating at a very quick speed. Again, given the typical university grant and contract procedures and requirements that, again, go beyond the purview of the Bunch Center, and for UCLA, even go beyond the purview of UCLA. UCLA has to abide by state requirements. So this is the timeline. In late November of 2021, DOJ awarded the grant to the Bunch Center, allowing it to commence the steps necessary to get all the pieces of the community engagement in place. That was November. UCLA could not do anything until that contract was in place. By the first week of December, UCLA received submitted the IRB application, which could not be submitted until a contract was in place. Institutional review boards can take anywhere from 1 to 3 months and longer to approve human subjects participation. Why did UCLA have to submit that? Because we're doing a survey of our participants. You cannot do a survey without getting assurance and sanction from your institution that all participants are protected. Nothing else could happen with contracting until that IRB was approved. By late December 2021, and it finally did get that approval sometime in December. Late December 2021 into early January, UCLA was closed. Nothing can happen in contracting because nobody was there. Despite that fact, we were able to hold the first meeting of the anchor organizations on January 3rd. But in terms of moving anything with respect to contracting monies, et cetera, nothing could happen. Then we get to mid-January through the 3rd week of January, the IRB approval is finally received. When that is received, that means now we can get to contracting with the anchor organizations, the communications firms, et cetera. So that with that approval, then the Bunch Center was given a fund number. And that fund number allowed it to go into the contracting process. By the end of January and into early February, the UCLA vendor approval process begins, that's typically a 2 to 3 week process. And what happened there is that we have requisitions and contracts being approved between mid-February and early March. Again, this is not an atypical process, but this is an atypical time frame within which all of those things were able to happen. So in terms of updates on the tasks, all contracts and grants are nearly finalized. There is now a shared Google Drive that's set up by the Bunch Center for the anchor organizations to share information with the listening session teams. This is just a screenshot of what that Google Drive consists of. And there are 29 plus people who have access to that. Those are the listening organizations, the anchor organizations, and the folks who are connected to communications, as well as the folks who are the conveners and facilitators. Another task was the anchor organization listening session report form. So after each listening session, the anchor organizations are requested to complete this listening session response form, which provides basic fundamental information to the Bunch Center that will be used for them to compile the final report. Task number 4 was developing a California statewide survey instrument. This goes above and beyond the contract. So UCLA is actually doing more, the Bunch Center, than what it was asked to do. The survey that is part of their contract is merely a survey of the participants who come to the listening sessions. UCLA went a step further and said, let's spread that out to the entire state and do a sample of Black residents and other residents in the state on several variables: basic demographics, political affiliation and leaning, measures that could be used for reparations, opinions on racial and economic inequality in the US, opinions on racial and economic inequality specific to California, and the question of who should be eligible for reparations. The survey instrument has been beta tested. It is basically about a 5-minute survey for a representative sample of Californians that will be administered late April after the vendor approval for the company that is helping the Bunch Center to get a representative sample of California. The survey will sample about 2,300 respondents with an oversampling of African Americans in the state. In addition, task number 6, the survey for community listening session participants is finalized. There's a QR code that people can use. There's a survey link that people can use. They can do it on their phone, their iPad, or their desktop or laptops. Task number 7, the website dashboard. It is near finalization. It has a beta site that's up and available for people to actually take a look at. I was going to show you it. It's on my laptop to show it to you, but we're on a different computer at this point. So that is an overview of where we are at with the Bunch Center and its delivery.
Can you go back to the website link, please?
Questions from task force members?
Yes, I have a question. So I'm looking at the contract right now, and I appreciate your presentation, Dr. Grills. I understand the internal affairs of bureaucracy, but my question is, the Bunch Center would be the most knowledgeable person of the internal affairs of bureaucracy at UCLA, right? So why isn't that reflected in the due dates of the deliverables? They set their own deadlines.
It's actually an interesting answer, and I have encountered the same thing. So when universities are used to doing research in a pretty narrow way, where the researcher comes up with a research question, a clear research design and set of methods, and then it follows it to the letter of the law, and everything is pre-specified. When you're doing community-based participatory approaches, that completely discombobulates universities. And that is the case for my university, and they've gotten used to it because 99% of my work is community-based participatory. The Bunch Center has not necessarily done that kind of research. And so where UCLA contracting wanted certain things pre-specified, you can't do that if it's community-based and participatory. You can't specify in advance that the listening sessions are all going to be on these dates in these places with this number of people, et cetera, et cetera. It is to be open to the community to define those things. Well, that drives them crazy. So while they understood research from a kind of typical narrow academic researcher perspective, they entered into new territory called community-based participatory work, which doesn't align with what one would naturally come up with as a timeline based on prior experience. And that was the case for the contracting department. I cannot tell you how many times Professor Stoll called me to say, we're trying to get this through, help me help them understand it. You know, because I've had to navigate these waters with my own institution.
Okay, great, thank you.
Can I just add, so as a faculty member, employee in the University of California system at Berkeley, these things are further complicated by the fact that a lot of these processes are actually handled centrally by the university system, not necessarily even by UCLA directly. So for example, when I have a payroll issue, it's actually an organization at UC Riverside that handles those things. And so the UC system also has a major staffing crisis. So the offices, what we call SPO, the contracting offices for research, are effectively understaffed. And so there's a significant backlog in just processing contracts and grants more generally. So I think there is something really to be said for just the complications of getting something like this processed. And then when you add in the actual intellectual limits of the, or not limits, requirements that are typical for IRB, then it is actually quite reasonable to think about the delay that we've seen with the Bunch Center. That's the UC system.
Thank you.
One other thing I will say, I sat, Chair Moore and I sat in on the most recent meeting of the anchor organizations on Monday. And so one important next step for me is connecting the anchor organ. Now that we have basic dates and areas of focus for the different listening sessions, is connecting them with the local governmental entities, city and county, that are interested in collaborating with the anchor organizations on listening sessions that align with their territory or area of focus. So that's going to be happening next week.
Comment? Yes, Vice Chair Brown, you're recognized.
Community that has already been fragmented all over the state. So that fragmentation by nature compromises communication. We're going to have to establish an alternative plan, in my estimation. It takes us time as an oppressed people to even get up, to get in motion. So I don't see us being effective. All of this other technology is good, it's fine to have it. Basically, we don't communicate out here with each other unless we're at the beauty shop, the barber shop, or the nail shop. Not everybody's in the church house, which is the basic institution of the African American people. So we're going to have to be creative, in my estimation. think outside of the box, how we are going to do a more effective job of reaching everybody. We go through this process.
Member Montgomery Stepp, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair Moore. I do have one question. As we listen to some of the anchor organizations that are represented and their ties to other organizations, if we had a situation where we would want to augment the contracts or add or take away, would that then require a whole additional process?
Yeah, that, unfortunately, yes. Again, I've had multiple conversations with Professor Stoll as we were actively trying to raise more money to make sure there was enough resources available to get all the work done. The UCLA contracting folks balked at any suggestion that amounts be modified on any line item. Again, not understanding community-based participatory process, that things can shift, and contracts can be enhanced and added to. So that would, if there was anything to be done to augment at this point, I would say it's best to go outside of.
That was my next question, foundations or that have ties with some of the institutions that might be easier to do some of those changes, especially when it comes to the point of we're getting to outreach and boots on the ground. Okay, thank you.
I don't know if there's anything, there seems to be no additional comments or questions. Shall I, are we done with this agenda item? Or is there something from a parliamentary perspective?
Yes, this matter is set for discussion and an update. So yes, there's no action that will come out of it.
Vice Chair Brown, you're
I
recognized.
think we need to delve deeper into how we're going to more effectively communicate with our base. Given bureaucratic structure of government, university system, how we're going to do a better job. That's the question.
I'm sorry. Mr. Vice Chair, if you're moving with respect to the report that was just heard, what you can do is move to have that item on the agenda for the next meeting.
No,
but you
no,
can't
no.
have a,
That's already on the
that's not what
agenda.
you're doing?
No, it's already on the
sorry.
agenda. It's the next agenda item. Are there any other comments or questions for Member Grills related to agenda item number 17, Community Engagement Plan Update?
But, Chair, this is supposed to be a community engagement plan. And a part of the community engagement is communication. And I don't see in this plan where we have in place communication for the meeting that's going to represent community engagement. We can't have engagements, we don't know who the community is and how you effectively communicate with that community in their language, in their style. That's what's missing.
I believe, Vice Chair, that is the next agenda item. So within the context of the Bunch Center contract is hiring the communications, identifying and hiring the communications firms. They completed that task. The next agenda item was to discuss where are we at with communication.
Yeah, so we can move on, but before we move on, I just wanted to just clarify. So I think there's a conflation going on. I understand what you're saying, Member Grills, about the bureaucracy again, but again, I'm looking at the contract, and there's certain deliverables in the contract that are, you know, not necessarily dependent on, you know, the that bureaucracy, as you say, and you already named in the timeline when the contract was fully processed. I'm not talking about the vendor contracts with the communication firms. I'm talking about the contracts between the DOJ and the Bunch Center itself. So for instance, the website, the due date for the website was February 28th of this year. I know in several planning meetings, people mentioned, you and Professor Stoll mentioned, we have a website. On our website, people went to the website, it wasn't there. This is my first time seeing the link. So I just want clarity. Are you saying that they couldn't put up the website by the due date of February 28th because of bureaucracy? Is that what you're saying? Why is the website link open, available today for the first time?
So I can't fully speak for Professor Stoll. I wish he were here, but we changed the time. So as best I understand it, part of the delay has to do with contracting and hiring. So the Bunch Center was operating essentially without the administrative infrastructure it needed to set some of these things up. Once those hires were made, they immediately started working, again, my understanding, on setting up the website. In the interim, they put a link on the regular Bunch website to allow any anchor organizations that were doing listening sessions and wanted to have a place for people to give additional personal testimony, a place to go. And that I shared that was up with the task force at our March meeting.
We can move on. I just want to say for the record, I wish Professor Stoll was here, but again, I think there's some miscommunications with the anchor orgs. Some anchor orgs think that they're supposed to use their stipends to secure location costs, recording costs, technician costs. There's some miscommunication as to whether they can, buy the recording equipment outright or whether it has to be rented. The contract itself, states that it doesn't state that it has to be rented. So there's just a lot of unanswered questions that I have. And I'll just, meet with Professor Stoll if needed to get further clarity.
Yeah, so let me just say one quick thing about those points. The anchor organizations, so again, everybody started and hit the ground running in warp speed as best as they could. In several different ways, it was communicated with the anchor organizations by myself, by Professor Stoll, by Attorney Lee, by Aman Yameche, to the best of their knowledge, what anchor organizations needed to do in order to access resources to support the logistics of implementing a listening session. Yes, so the contracts don't say we're going to buy you equipment, but the contracts do say support will be provided. Frankly, I don't see any reason why the task force's resources by way of the monies raised by the Bunch Center and myself would be used to purchase equipment for listening sessions to the tune of thousands of dollars when needed equipment could be rented or other kinds of logistics could be worked out. There's not an unlimited availability of resources. So if every anchor organization wanted to go out and buy thousands of dollars worth of equipment, that essentially would end up with a situation where one or two anchor organizations get resource support and the rest are left out in the cold. So how do we distribute a limited amount of money equitably across all of the anchor organizations? You determine what your needs are, you submit them to the Bunch Center, and then the Bunch Center weighs that across the needs of all of the anchor organizations and make the best with what we have to work with in as equitable a distribution process as possible.
And I'll talk to Professor Stoll, but in the contract, it also talks about virtual sessions. It says experienced sources indicate that production of one virtual event is estimated to cost around $6,000. This amount is based on expenses for a similar virtual event that incorporated use of pre-recorded content and music. Issues to consider include what platforms will be utilized, Zoom, Facebook Live, YouTube, the length of the event, and whether the event will be interactive. So essentially my point is that in the contract, virtual sessions are budgeted, and the Bunch Center states that a virtual event is estimated to cost around $6,000. I know that some anchor organizations do plan to host virtual sessions, but again, it points to, I'm not sure if things are being effectively communicated from the Bunch Center to the anchor orgs. I'm not sure if they even know that there could be logistical support for a virtual event up to $6,000. So again,
That wasn't necessarily monies that would go directly to the anchor organizations. That's also for the Bunch Center to do what it needed to do to record things, to get permissions, licenses, et cetera. That wasn't just for the anchor organizations. That's why I raised additional money to make sure that there would be resources available to the anchor organizations.
yes, but this is under the line item for listening session.
Yeah.
The anchor orgs are leading the listening sessions, and the Bunch Centers provide support for
Right.
the anchor org.
And the Bunch Center also has to do its due diligence around providing coverage of those in terms of note takers, their own note takers, their own recording devices, their own permission, whatever internet platform is going to be necessary for them to make sure that the anchor organizations have the virtual access that they need.
Thanks, that's my point, because I think at the last community's listening session, I mean, the last community meeting that I was at, I think it was COPE, Congregation for Prophetic Engagement, who had planned to do a virtual listening session over Zoom. And, you know, they didn't think that they would be offered any support other than it just being a Zoom call. So just like,
So all they need to do is ask.
okay.
Madam Chair,
It
I'm
needs-
sorry
it
to
needs be
interrupt.
communicated.
Professor Stoll is on the line. He said if you put him on speakerphone, he should be able to. he should
Okay,
be able to hear.
Professor Stoll. Yes, my concern, this is my overarching concern. It needs to be clearly communicated to all of the anchor organizations, the specific particularities around the support that the Bunch Center is supposed to provide to the anchor organizations as outlined in the contract. Professor Stoll. Professor Stoll. And again, I'm not saying this just out of reading the contract. Literally, anchor organizations have communicated to me their concerns. So I used to work for the Bunch Center. I went to UCLA. There's no hard feelings. It's business. Okay, any other questions, comments?
Is there a way to put the phone on speaker? I think-
It's on speaker. Professor Stoll? All the questions I had, Professor Stoll. We can move to the next agenda item if there aren't any other questions related to the community engagement plan update and discussion regarding the agreement. Now we'll go to agenda item 18, potential action items, strategies for communications on press inquiries and how to educate the California public on report findings.
Okay, so this is an update.
Hello, Professor Stoll, sorry.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, we hear you. So, Professor Stoll, I'm not sure.
Hello?
Yes, can you hear me?
Hello? Hello?
Yes, we hear you.
Yes.
Okay, yes, I'm not sure if you heard me, but essentially I'll be brief and state that anchor organizations have communicated to me some concerns around the lack of communication around the types and depth of support that the Bunch Center is supposed to provide to the anchor organizations as outlined in the contract. So I'm making that known to you, Professor Stoll. And I would hope that, yeah, go ahead.
I'm terribly sorry. Every third or fourth word is cutting out on the audio. Can you hear me? When you speak, I can only pick up one every other third or fourth word.
Yeah, I can hear you. Do you want to just speak? I'm not sure how much of the conversation you heard earlier, or do you have any thoughts or contributions that you wanted to share to the task force, to the public?
I heard from about the point of the survey when I logged in first. The presentation by Dr. Grills on the survey instrument and where we're at with survey development and administration.
Okay, well, can you hear me?
I can hear you a little better now.
Okay, so I'll follow up with you soon, but I was essentially stating to Member Grills that anchor organizations have reached out to me talking about the lack of communication from the Bunch Center about the types of support and the depth of support that the Bunch Center is supposed to provide to the anchor organizations as outlined in the key deliverables in the contract between the Bunch Center and the DOJ that was approved in November of last year.
Okay, I am unaware of those concerns. They have not been addressed directly to me. What we have done is set up a structure by which we meet regularly, and any concerns and needs are shared there. There are questions posed to me by anchor organizations about needs, and we are responsive to let them know that we will inquire. Some of them require additional administrative inquiry about how additional resources can be combined with their existing contracts. So some of that is logistical questions that we take a couple of days to answer. But once we answer them, we get back to them. We are very responsive to any concerns that are provided. We meet regularly, and we have developed a Google Share Drive to be able to share information and concerns. I've also made my number and my email available to anybody to answer any questions or concerns or support. A lot of the questions up front were around contracting, and I think for some of for Bunch, but also for the vendors, all of that's new. So there are requests out vendors that we did not get response from, because vendors are also learning how to implement and set up their requisitions and purchase orders as well. So some of this is learning by doing, and some of that is frustrating on both parts. But I think that we've been fairly responsive. Our role was to ensure that they're able to plan and execute their listening sessions to the best potential as possible. And I think that they've been doing that fairly well, given what we've received as requests.
Okay, well, one of the anchor organizations has been in contact with you, or has been trying to reach out for a couple of weeks and has gotten no response.
I'd be happy to know who that is and where that email is, and I'd be happy to investigate that and respond quickly, because all of the emails are responded to as quickly as possible.
Yes, the California Black Women's Health Project, which is CJEC's fiscal sponsor. My last two comments, and we can move on. In the contract, it states that the Bunch Center is supposed to meet with the anchor organizations approximately every 2 months to shape, as a deliberative body, the listening sessions.
And we do that through our lead organizer, Mary Lee, who has been organizing the total team effort of stakeholders who are involved in the community listening effort.
But anchor orgs have told me that you all have not been meeting every 2 months. In fact, I think in March or February, you all didn't meet at all. So moving forward, being solution oriented, will the Bunch Center be meeting with the anchor organizations every meet approximately? Yeah, will you all be meeting twice a month?
Excuse me, I think you were conflating.
Sure,
Sorry.
we can. The meetings that we've had have been extremely productive, and we've been able to address any and all concerns that are raised in those meetings.
Yes.
And in all of those meetings, we also make it known that we are available for support and to help answer any questions. When we start the meeting, we ask if there's any outstanding concerns too. We always give opportunity for anchor organizations to share where they're at or what they might need. And when we receive those, we respond in as timely as fashion as possible.
And I think that, I'm sorry, Professor Stoll, I was just going to say, I think Chair Moore was
But we'd
also.
be happy to meet. Even if it's a short meeting, if we need additional meetings, we will. We will meet.
Yes, sorry, I misspoke. Go ahead, River Girls.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think you're introducing two different things.
Mhm.
There's some statement in the contract for the Bunch Center that they would meet twice a month with each anchor org in support of their preparation of listening sessions. And then there's something about the anchor orgs would meet as a
Every
group every 2 months.
Yes. Mhm.
Now, and in fact, they've been meeting more than every 2 months. Yes, and in terms of the Bunch Center meeting with them twice a month, that has been happening through the auspices of Ama Nyameche, who is the listening session facilitator. And so she does one-on-one meetings with them, but when she's meeting with them, that's the Bunch Center.
Right.
So that has been happening.
Okay, great. So my last question is
I couldn't
about.
make out all of that, but I failed to mention the sub-meetings that take place too, that plan for the specific project facilitation and logistical support for the committee listening sessions too.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Member Grills, Professor Stoll. My last question is about if you are able to provide an update on the Tier 2 organizations.
That depends
I'm
on.
sorry, was that a question that was addressed to me? If so,
Yeah.
I was not able to make that up.
The
I couldn't
tier,
understand.
well, Member Grills will answer, or Tier 2 organizations.
Right, so there's no contracting directly with the Tier 2 organization. It is totally up to each anchor organization to decide who and how many of the folks within their network they want to enlist as a Tier 2 organization. And then it is up to each anchor organization to determine what resources their network members need to support their outreach and implementation of a listening session. Because of the complications or how complicated it is to do any contracting through the UC system, there is no way we want to encumber things with a Tier 2 organization trying to be set up as a vendor. What will happen, and what we're trying to make sure can happen, is that an anchor organization can receive the resources needed. They have to specify who, for what, to what end. And then, so it may be that a Tier 2 organization is going to do this massive leaflet, thank you. I can't get that one out. They're going to pass out, material door to door. And so they need to hire some temporary folks to go out and do that. They need money for duplication of those pamphlets, et cetera. Then they would submit that information to their anchor organization. The anchor organization says to Bunch Center, here's what we need for our Tier 2 to do their contribution to our effort. Then that would get handled that way.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I know that the Bunch Center, through the anchor organizations, we've only had one formal listening session with African Black Coalition.
There's another one happened last week. Prepared Nation.
Okay. Well, I know that the website just was published.
And the third one, ABC, also did another listening session in Sacramento at its day on Sacramento.
Okay, so just a quick note, I understand. But on the website, there should be the transcripts from those meetings.
On the website?
Yeah, there should, right?
I'm not sure. I don't know about that.
Well, it wasn't the plan to have a portal? To
Yeah,
talk
that's
about
that's not to put up what people said. That is to put up a portal for people to go to submit their own personal testimony.
Okay, so the transcripts from each listening session won't be on the website? Okay, no problem. All right, thank you. We can move on to the next item on the agenda.
Okay, so the next item on the agenda is the communication process. The original plan was for the two communications firms to present today to the task force. At our last meeting in March, a number of questions were raised about the deliverables, the process, and essentially the competency of those communication firms. The way in which that happened was essentially offensive to the communication firms. They expected that there would be a professional courtesy, that if the task force or members of the task force had concerns related to communications, that they would reach out to them and give them a heads up. We're not sure about this. We're not understanding that. We expected this other thing. That did not happen. And so essentially, in a public venue without any preparation or notice, the communications firms were put on blast. That was, and it felt fairly toxic and unhealthy, the way in which it was done, and some of the things that were insinuated. That, along with, well, I'll just say that essentially one of the results from that is that the AB Partners has resigned as one of the communications. Young Communications is now wanting to hear from the task force on a number of issues that are essential to answer for whoever is going to be the communications firm for this task force. And again, given the tone and I'll just leave it, the tone of the discussion last month, they declined to be here today, but they did share some information and documents about things that they would like the task force to address with respect to communication. So I've prepared a summary in the next slides that you're going to see to essentially share some basic points and to let the task force know what it is that we need to deliberate about. I'll also say that I keep hearing in public comment this idea that $1 million has been given to the communications firms. Facts matter and the truth matters. So that being said, the communications firms do not have $1 million to work with. I don't know where people got that idea, but they do not have $1 million. Secondly, neither of the communications firms have been paid a dime up to this point. And so with that, let me move on to sharing with you updates. Starting with Young Communications UCLA vendor contract. The first task for them was planning, and the following are the activities that they were to undertake. Ensure clarity about the goals, objectives, audiences, desired outcomes, and measurements of success for the communications effort, and to develop a preliminary creative brief, meet with the community engagement team to gain agreement and clarity. Task number 2 was message architecture framework. And that was to essentially identify the key audiences, the type of messages, including informational messages about the task force's current activities, et cetera, and messages for potential listening session participants, as well as an announcement about Anchor.org background and their community engagement process, and any issues management that would be needed to support that process. Task 3 is the community engagement support. That involves developing appropriate community engagement messages. The intention is for transparency and a continuous cycle or circle of communication. Task 4 is to implement integrated communications program. That involves implementing a comprehensive and strategic communications program, following the roadmap established in the creative brief that was to be designed, and then that would lead to securing radio sponsorships, and negotiating and buying, placing ads, implementing a vigorous digital and social media process, and launching strong earned media and media relations efforts. That included garnering coverage in the Black press. So now remember the contracting and the fact that they have not yet actually been able to receive any resources to do their work. The two communications firms were in the active process of finalizing how they were going to triage those tasks, because the contract for the AV partners was the same as the contract for the Young Communications firm. They were well on their way to finalizing that process, and then within that understanding, creating some of the materials and the work needed for some of those tasks that have just been outlined. Everything came to a screeching halt at our March meeting. So in follow-up, after AV Partners resigned, Young Communications had a meeting with me, and then followed up with a meeting with Member Montgomery Stepp, myself, and some representatives from the DOJ. Because at this point, again, Young Communications is not sure that in the environment that seems to have been created in the March meeting, it would be fruitful and possible for them to deliver if they are, if I could put it this way, if they are under a light of no confidence in their work, or a misunderstanding about the role that they play. And the role that they are playing is a strategic communications firm, not a publicist, in the sense that you would see in entertainment processes, not a handler of any members of the task force, but strategic communications. With that said, in our conversation, Young Communications shared with myself and Member Montgomery Stepp some of their concerns. And the concerns have to do with something very, very similar to what we went through with our economics experts. We needed to give them guidance so that they would have clear parameters within which to do their work. That needed to happen, and that step has not happened with our task force. So with that, I want to point out the following. Young Communications said, we as a task force need to clarify for them, or for any communications firm, who is the client? Is it DOJ? Is it the task force as a whole? Or is it designated members of the task force? That is incredibly important in order for them to then carry out the areas of work under those 4 tasks that I outlined. Who gives the direction and manages the communications firm? The DOJ, task force as a whole, or designated members of the task force? Are the requests for communication support consultation representative of the entire task force? How should requests for communication support consultation be handled? By a representative of the entire task force or individual members? What is the process for determining priority for these communications requests? And what and who determines the measurement of success for the scope of work? So these are the driving questions that we as the task force must answer and agree upon. And the answers to these questions would help Young Communications Group determine if they are still positioned to prepare, plan, and implement, per the task force request, the scope of work and the communications campaign that was to originally have been optimized by both communication firms. The other thing that, again, because of our process, and as a result of a lack of structure, focus, and sound processes established by us as a task force, um, we may have, unfortunately, how am I going to put a negative spin, cast in a negative light, the reputation of communications firms who have spent years diligently working to build credible reputations. And so another important thing that we as a task force need to consider is whether or not there is a need to publicly state that we as a task force did not intend to cast aspersions on the reputations of those communications firms, and that we as a task force need to do our due diligence in providing some direction so that everyone is able to complete the work at hand. So here are some considerations from Young Communications. The best way to handle incoming media queries given California Reparations Task Force's current structure, staff, and consultant support and constraints, like in the form of Bagley Keene, would require that the person or entity have the authority, a person or entity have the authority to craft statements, access opportunities, and respond quickly to inquiries. And ideally, there would either be a designated staff person or is this, you know, as requests come in, we, shoot him by the hip. I'll pick this up, you pick that up. How are we centralizing this? Does this need to be the task force chair and another member, given the decision-making process? It's recommended that the task force establish an advisory committee of two, and I'm correcting my own typo here on the slide, but it's establish an advisory committee of 2 people on our task force that would be responsible for working with the communications representative, whoever that is, to identify the task force expert who will speak to issues being requested by the media. And just because a media outlet asks for an interview does not mean you respond and give them an interview. We need strategic communication. And it may be that a particular media outlet is asking for an interview, and that interview is not, has some cross purposes or a hidden agenda, or that, it would be best suited for the task force to not do that interview because the nature of the topic is putting the cart before the horse, that we are going to be deliberating about something, and there's no point in us giving an interview about it, and we haven't deliberated on the issue. This advisory committee of 2 could be responsible and be the official representative of the task force in communications and media decision-making situations. For example, after we did our community of eligibility vote, there was a flood of requests for media appearances, and there was no clear center to the decision-making about who and how and when those things would happen. And even though there was a process that was put in place by Young Communications for that, we did not follow it. After a public hearing, that this advisory committee would work with the communications representative to craft the official public-facing statement of decisions, actions, next steps that will be posted and disseminated. This will be the official statement of outcomes on pivotal decisions such as the eligibility issue. Many of these suggestions were already actually outlined in February as Young Communications was deliberating with AB Partners about how they were going to triage the work. And they were ready to implement, or they were getting close to ready to implement it, and then things kind of went awry. And then again, that advisory committee would be the final decision-making team who would determine who the designated spokesperson and alternate would be on key public-facing issues for which a statement is developed. There's no way to seamlessly, efficiently, or strategically respond to media requests without some kind of process agreed upon by us as a task force. Another recommendation was that we conduct spokesperson, that the communications firm would conduct spokesperson training for the key members of the task force. I have been on other bodies and entities where it was required before we could be spokespersons on behalf of things. We went through a training to understand how to be on message, how to respond to questions, and to be educated about what do you need to know about this particular media outlet before you speak with them. And that would involve inviting task force members to participate, determining who they would encourage to attend. And then finally, develop a basic backgrounder on the task force and where it is, what they're doing now. That's something that the communications firm would like to see happen. That involves audiences, task force members, legislators, media, and the use of the website. This has been completed, but it needs to be updated. If approved, the task force, we would conduct the first of a series of quarterly media briefings with our communications firm that would be held virtually and led by 2 members of the task force. Prior to the media briefing, Young Communications would develop the program topics, speaking points, as well as conduct the media outreach. Again, they had already thought through a lot of this, and it was primed to get implemented, but they hadn't gotten their contracts back. They hadn't gotten any resources to get started. And then, we had our deliberation in March that effectively gave a vote of no confidence, not by the entire task force, but by some. The first media briefing will be set up for officially releasing the report, and would focus on the report on progress to date, next steps, et cetera, et cetera. The briefing would also include a Q&A with attending journalists. Again, Young Communication knows how to do this. They have a strong reputation in California for how to do this. They have relationships with media outlets. They have relationships with the Black press in California. So in terms of the task force tasked with respect to communications, should we appoint one task force member as the official spokesperson? That needs to be discussed with DOJ in terms of viability, and this may or may not be the best approach at this juncture. We may find that having an advisory committee of 2 may be the best way to go. This also involves assigning media relations facilitation as a distinct task deliverable to communications consultants for the next 90 days, contingent upon implementing some of the highlighted recommendations. So in conclusion, this isn't an interim process because foundational decisions need to be made to establish a long-term sustainable process with Young Communications or whomever else. For example, who is the spokesperson, or how are we deciding that? How are decisions made, and who determines which decisions require a crafted message? Who crafts that message? Who approves task force external? An update on the communications firm and.
Yes, Vice Chair Brown, you're recognized.
Madam Chair and members of the task force. Let's be for real. Number one, it makes me uneasy to hear the title of the organization. Young Community Communicators. W.B. Du Bois came up with a notion of two-ness. Two-ness that should govern any human gathering. It takes 2 wings for a bird to fly, 2 wings for an airplane to stay in the air. And that's Amos Brown speaking. The name of the group concerns me. Number 2, Why should we reinvent the wheel? Any other organization, that's an organization, has been in existence since the fall out of Noah's Ark. There's leadership. Mississippi, where I came from, they said, you never seen two persons riding a mule and both of them up front. And then we have elected a chairperson. That chairperson should be empowered to speak for this task force. And if she is not available, or he, there's a designee, I think it's insulting to all of us. Suggest we got to go around and play hopscotch on who's going to speak. Let us respect the leadership that we chose by due process to be the leader. It's my little opinion. I think we should get past this, not go around in circles. And I think that this chairman, or anyone who's the chairman, who is chosen rightly, unless they do something that represents malfeasance, something wrong, that they will have the integrity, common sense, wisdom, and courage. Speak. We know what this task force is about. It's not about an individual. It's about the people. The people. No one individual. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair Brown, Member Grills, and then Senator Bradford.
I just want to make one point of clarification, Vice Chair. Young Communications is named Young Communications because the founder and CEO's last name is Young.
Go ahead, Senator Bradford.
No problem. And I appreciate much of what Reverend Brown stated. I very rarely have any problems with anything that he says. And this was an excellent presentation as to what is needed to go forward. But I think my concern that was expressed at the last meeting was the rudimentary basic communications of letting the community know about these hearings and about the process that has gone down, not the granular as to once we set an agenda, once we have the report out, who's responsible for communicating, because I believe it does fall upon the chair to be the spokesperson and any designee. And I think everybody on this task force, based on their profession, is more than qualified to face the best of press inquiries and handle it without any additional training once we know what the goals and objectives are with this task force. My concern as a person who came out of public relations and marketing was always, I'm getting jammed in the community about when's the next meeting? What's on the meeting agenda? Who's doing what? That's the part that we have failed at. And I think we have a great story to tell, and we're not telling it because, frankly, I thought we'd be in standing room only these 2 days. I thought everybody in California would want to be here because everybody in California that I run into wants to be engaged in this process. And I think we missed the mark in promoting this first in-person meeting. And I think that's where the frustration was and then and is for me still today. So how do we promote the task force as a whole and the work we're doing and the meetings that we're having and the communities that we're holding these meetings at? Because I talked to Black press, Regina Wilson she says, I haven't got anything on this. I don't know what's going on. What are you guys doing? And I again, every time I'm in the community, I'm confronted by someone saying, when's the next task force meeting? Or I watched it online, but what's next? So that's what we need to do better because this will sell itself if we get it to the right people.
Yes, I concur. Member Montgomery Stepp, you're recognized.
My little mouse voice, get the mic. Thank you, Chair Moore. Yeah, I wanted to comment because I did attend the meeting with Young Communications. some of my questions were not, it should have been directed to the Bunch Center because that's what came up at the last meeting more so than this and this laying out a communications strategy. I do believe that, you know, the deference should be given to the chair with regard to speaking. I've kind of expressed that on several occasions in different ways, in different subjects with regard to this task force. But I do think that we have to further delineate, which is why I asked the last question about augmenting contracts and services. So I completely agree that when we are talking about people knowing what we're doing, people getting to our meetings, people being updated in real time, we are talking about community-based organizations. That's what we are talking about. In San Diego, I'll just point to one specific example. We had no problem getting the rent relief money that we got from the feds and from the state. We had no problem getting that out because from the very beginning, we said we are going to give money to these community-based organizations that know where the people are. And it worked out and we put it within our structure and our system. So I do agree with that with regard to that type of outreach. But I also agree that we need a communication strategy. What we're dealing with, I'll call you all brilliant and geniuses. You know, what we're dealing with can be very complex and convoluted. And getting that across on a national stage, because we are the example for what we hope to happen in this nation, it does need a larger strategy, and it does need, I think, that level of experience that based on my brief conversation that Young Communications has. I think we just need to delineate what is what and what responsibility we're giving to what party. That's what I have been missing in the beginning. And I just, you know, I want to get to that point because we're going to reach the first milestone of this body, which is releasing that interim report. And we really don't have a strategy around how we're going to communicate that. So those are my comments and my perspective. The last thing I'll say is what I thought also was very interesting, that in Young Communications, a normal process, they would kind of do one-on-ones with the task force members, which I think adds a level of just knowledge about who we are and how to approach certain things and certain requests. And my question to the DOJ was, does Bagley-Keene in any way prohibit that? And the answer was no. So I think there's some things we can still benefit from. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. So yes, to be solution-oriented, Member Grills, you listed out a few recommendations. So in the event you want to entertain a motion related to the recommendations, you can do that now.
As a task force, I would recommend that we form an advisory committee that works directly with the communications firm around messaging, outreach, triaging, requests for media appearances, commentary, that we need to do that.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, it's been properly moved by Member Grills and seconded by Member Jovan Scott Lewis that the task force create an advisory board committee that works directly with the communications firm to triage press and other related activities to the communication strategy. Any discussion on the matter? Sorry, Member Holder, you're recognized.
Seems like Member Grills and Member Montgomery staff have already been working with the communications team. So it seems to me like you guys would, the two of you would be ideal for the advisory committee.
So if I can be recognized, Chair.
Yes, you're recognized.
Okay, thank you. Yes, that's fine. My concern is how that would bump up against what a few of us have said here is that, with regard to these requests, the chair, and not kind of just jumping over that. So we had this discussion about advisory or subcommittee, because a sub, although it's publicly facing, it would allow it to be more than 2 people. But for purposes of this, we might need to turn around quickly, which is the subcommittee can't really do. So I'm kind of in between. I've been thinking about it, obviously, and in between those thoughts.
Yes, Member Gross.
Yeah, I just want to agree with Member Montgomery Step that, subcommittee would be great, but it would bring a whole other set of challenges that would slow us down. And so an advisory committee would be our next best option. And then I think in a separate motion, we can specify so that we're all in agreement and we're all following it. Who are the who's the designated spokesperson, which typically is the chair. And then who would be the designee aside from that, but it may be that we give our communications firm the authority to discern certain members have, capacity and skill sets that would speak well to a particular media request. And so we don't want to unduly hinder our ability to be as effective in our communications because we have narrowly decided who gets to speak for the task force.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Vice Chair Brown, you're recognized.
I'm members of the task force. I ask you to consider that the chair be spokesperson of this task force.
Excuse me, a point of order. You already have a motion on the floor.
I'm speaking to the issue.
You said you wanted to make a motion. That sounded like a second motion.
No, I'm speaking to the issue.
The first motion didn't identify anybody. It was simply to create an advisory committee. And that was seconded. So you want to amend the motion to identify?
Who seconded the motion, Madam President?
Javon Scott Lewis seconded.
Yes. So are you seeking to amend the motion, which is fine, if that's what you want to do? But I'm saying that there's already a motion that's been made and seconded to create the advisory committee.
With the maker of the motion restated. Everybody know what we're talking
Yes, I'll restate the motion. So the motion on the floor, which was properly moved by Member Grills and then properly seconded by Member Jovan Scott Lewis, was to create an advisory board committee, which would consist of 2 members of the task force. And they would be responsible with working directly with the communications firms to refine and formulate a communication strategy, which would include, identifying the spokesperson for press and things like that. So that's the motion on the floor. Okay, so is there?
I point of clarity and order. There's a difference between determining a strategy and the issue that's before the House of who would be the spokesperson for this task force. Those 2 different animals.
Yes, we agree with you.
I think his point is that it seems as in this advisory board committee, the decision of being a spokesperson would be decided by the advisory board committee. I think that was his understanding. Okay, so we can move forward. Is there any further discussion on the motion on the floor?
I would just reiterate that I suggest, I would recommend that advisory Member Grills and
Member Holder, I'm sorry, could you speak up, please?
Again, I would reiterate that it should be included in the motion that the advisory committee consists of Member Grills and Member Montgomery Scott.
You can do a follow-up motion for that. So the motion on the floor is.
You can amend the motion if you want to make a motion to amend.
Right.
But you don't have to follow up. It's part of this.
Currently.
So if she makes an amendment to that motion to include that, then what she would do is say, I move to amend the motion so that the advisory committee will identify the spokesperson, and then that needs to be seconded by a member of the task force. Then you would vote on the amendment, and then depending on what happens with that vote, then you would move back to the primary vote or the main motion.
I think that's a,
Yes, you're recognized.
so I would feel uncomfortable with the advisory committee deciding.
Wait a second, hold on. I need to know if she wants to make the motion to amend.
Yeah, I'll make the motion to.
Now you need a second. It's been made.
Second.
Okay.
And then Scott Lewis, member Lewis made the second.
No.
So you're specifying now it's going to be that advisory committee.
Yeah, I'm making a motion to amend, to specify that the advisory committee consists of.
I point of order. These are two different animals. Please.
I understand that.
But wait a minute. You're confusing the issue. The issue that was before the House, that you made a suggestion of, Dr. Creel, was that would be an advisory committee to deal with communication. That's what your idea was. Order would say we vote on that first. And the other thing is second, about the spokesperson.
Right. That's what we're doing.
No, you're talking about, you got an amendment here.
That's just specifying who would be the advisory committee, not who's the spokesperson.
Hey, do you have point of order or verification? Okay, so there's been properly moved to amend the motion to state that the advisory board committee that will work directly with the communication firms will comprise of members Grills and members Montgomery Step. And it was properly seconded by who again? Member Jovan Scott Lewis. Okay, is there any discussion on the matter? Member Grills and member Montgomery Step.
Procedure practice, have 3 persons, not 2.
Because of Bagley-Keene rules, if it was 3 people, we would have to adhere to Bagley-Keene with, notice and all that type of stuff. And because of the urgency of the situation, we would need to create a 2-person advisory board committee to circumvent around the restrictions of Bagley-Keene.
Dr. Brown, all of the other advisory committees are two persons. Hear more myself on the advisory committee for the economic experts. Members Holder and Tamaki on the subpoena powers advisory committee.
I'm just gonna say, I think that I should be on the committee for multiple reasons. But for one, the meeting that the communication firms held a month ago or so just really left not only a bad taste in my mouth, but in the community's mouth. And I think the response that I had at the March meeting was a response to the multitude of emails that the task force received immediately after Young Communications and AB Partners advertised an emergency meeting that was scheduled to be an hour long. They sent it to an unknown list of organizations. Still to this date, don't know who exactly they sent that invite to. They did not invite the anchor organizations. The information for the meeting was leaked. I don't know how, but it was leaked. And so then the anchor orgs were able to attend and other people in the community were able to attend. The email was advertised as a 1-hour emergency advisory meeting on behalf of the task force to talk about the upcoming eligibility vote. When I attended the meeting and I told the DOJ to send out the information to the task force, because at that time I didn't know if any of the task force members knew about this meeting, even though it was advertised as a meeting that was on behalf of us. And at the meeting, it lasted 15 minutes, so it was not an hour. And the communications firms gave out bad information. I saw it with my own eyes. Someone asked for the website for the task force, and Gwendolyn Young of Young Communications gave out an email instead of a website, and it was the incorrect email, right? So, they did this meeting on their own volition, right? So in terms of reputation, that's them. That's not on us, right? That's them. So, my underlying concern is, and I don't doubt anyone on this task force in terms of our own personal investment to this effort, but, given that I did announce very strongly my concerns about the community engagement, I believe I need to be on this task force. Also, just for the record, I emailed Young Communications and AB Partners directly because the DOJ said that I could do that. And when I did, I asked, do you have any updates around whether you're going to do some promotional graphics for the upcoming hearing? I didn't get a response at all. And then a separate email, I asked, I would love to meet with you all, to hear your ideas. And they sent me an email with some type of strategy, but to be quite honest, it was incoherent. So again, as chair, I think that I need to be a part of this communications advisory board committee. For one, like I said, I'm personally invested in this. I've made my concerns known already about the communications firms. And yeah, I have a particular vision that I would like to work with another advisory board committee to ensure that we, recruit a competent and community-centered communications firm that, doesn't, so I'll leave it there.
Madam Chair,
Vice Chair Brown.
what you just shared, it lays a burden on us. Just be fair and transparent and get on with the basic issue. The proof of the pudding is in the eating. And the previous arrangement for communication has caused the one thing that is compromised. It's compromised communication about this very meeting. I don't think we want to do that. We don't want to stay on that kind of a trajectory. I think we should just pause and take a deep breath here and get centered on the matter of making the main thing the main thing. And the main thing is the people's agenda. Not Amos Brown, not any of us. It's not about us. It's about the people.
Madam Chair, I'm very much fine with withdrawing my name. I already expressed my concerns about making it more confusing, right, with the two-person, and so I'm okay with that. I don't know if there is, Madam Parliamentarian, if there's an official way to do that? Do we still need to vote on the motion or what?
Okay, let me clarify where you are. The only thing you're voting on now is the amendment. You're not voting on the main motion. The only thing you're voting on is an amendment, and that amendment is to identify that based on the main motion, that the advisory committee will have the authority to pick the chair, the spokesperson.
No, no, Ms. Johnson. The amendment is, it specified the main motion, which was to add the members of the committee, which would be myself and Member Grills. And that's why I was asking for clarification about removal of my name.
No, that is not what her amendment was. Was it? Because would you repeat your amendment? To allow the advisory committee
To consist of 2 members, Member Grills and Member Montgomery.
to do what?
To consist of Member Grills and Member Montgomery Step. In reality, that's
Okay,
more than
I'm
an
sorry.
amendment, that's a
That is
substantive
correct.
motion, but
Okay, that is correct. But then there was also a question with respect to what their authority would be. No.
That wasn't a part of, that wasn't a part of the motion.
Well, then I
That would be a
apologize
separate,
because
that would be a separate motion to, as a task force, designate the official spokesperson for the task force.
that was part of your original.
No,
See,
that
I
was a
heard
separate
that
motion.
motion.
That's a separate motion altogether. That hasn't been put on the floor.
Point of clarification.
Okay, so that's where your.
Member Montgomery Step is recognized.
Yes.
I would just ask that Member Holder and the seconder just remove that, withdraw that, so that we can vote up or down on an advisory committee.
Which was my intention.
That's fine. I'm happy to withdraw the motion.
Okay, and you withdraw your second?
Yeah, I withdraw this.
We're back to the main motion.
Okay, great. So now we're back to the original motion on the floor, which was properly moved by Member Grills and properly seconded by Member Scott Lewis to create a 2-person advisory board committee to work directly with the communications firms on developing a communication strategy. Developing and implementing, excuse me, a communication strategy. Any discussion or further discussion on the motion? Hearing no further discussion, I'll turn to Parliamentarian Johnson for a roll call vote. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I will call, beginning with Madam Chair.
Aye.
Vice Chair Brown.
No.
I'm sorry?
No.
No?
Yes.
Member Bradford?
This is to establish a 2-person advisory board committee.
All right.
Member Grills? Aye. Member Holder?
Aye.
Member Holder votes aye. Member Lewis?
Aye.
Member Lewis votes aye. Member Tamaki?
Aye.
Member Tamaki votes aye. Member Montgomery Step?
Aye.
Member Montgomery Step? Madam Chair, there were 8 members voting. 7 members voted aye and 1 member voted nay.
Thank you, Parliamentarian Johnson. So there are 7 ayes, 1 nay. And so the ayes have it and the motion carries. So
Chair, I have a motion.
you are recognized, Vice Chair Brown.
I make the motion that after due consultation with this task force, that the chair will always be the spokesperson for this task force to the media on weighty issues regarding reparations in this state.
Is there a second? It has been properly moved by Vice Chair Brown and seconded by Member Montgomery Stepp that the chairperson of the Reparations Task Force is the official spokesperson for the task force for media engagements with due communication with the task force. So I'll restate the motion. What does that mean? So this motion on the floor is that the chairperson of the task force is the official spokesperson of the task force with due communication to the task force. That's the motion on the floor. It's been properly moved and seconded. We'll move to discussion. I think Member Scott Lewis, you said, what does that mean?
Yeah, meaning the due communication. Don't know. Can you clarify what due
That one,
communication?
that number one on weighty, I put that in there. Issue, determining issue.
Well,
Chair would have the courtesy to communicate with this task force.
Yes, and I'll just say to add to discussion, that's already been happening, right? In the event that, press has reached out to me and has stated they wanted to specifically talk to me, I've respected that. But then in other opportunities, for instance, with MSNBC, Jovan can speak to that. I actually recommended for Jovan Scott Lewis to appear on the show rather than me. I have sent, names of other members like Tamaki and Grills and Holder, names to press in the event that I cannot, make it, or I think in the event that they need a fresh voice, in the event that I think they need a fresh voice. So I just want to state for the record that that's already been happening.
So is that what Dr. Brown is
Yes.
suggesting? Okay.
Madam Chair, if I could just interject, I just wanted to provide a point of clarification that to the extent task force members are contacted also by media outlets where there are requests for you to do interviews or to talk to people, you all may do so in your individual capacities. So by designating a spokesperson for the task force, that does not take away your ability to communicate directly when contacted.
Exactly. Okay, is there any other further discussion matter?
No, that was the only question I have, because we as elected officials get inquiries all the time about what we're working on. So I want to make sure that we still have a, latitude to at least respond in our own professional setting to questions that are made to us. And I have no problem with clearly letting the chair be this, the clear identifiable spokesperson for this task force, just as the mayor is for a city or the speaker for the assembly or the pro tem for the Senate. So I have no problem with following those protocols.
Okay, great. Member Gross, you're recognized.
I have no problem with the motion for that amendment. That amendment to me just complicates and confuses things. So I don't know why we need to, we just can't go with the original statement. I'm not seeing the value added, but I'm again seeing complications and confusion.
Yep. Can you explain what's complicated about the?
What does it mean? I still don't understand what it means.
Due communication.
What does that mean? I mean, because there's not going to be time for you to reach out to every member of the task force. You can still do that without having to put that into but that seems to add something that just to me just makes things a little weird.
You're recognized, Member Scott Lewis.
So can we say that we're simply formalizing the existing practice? Is that a good way to interpret what you're suggesting, Dr. Brown?
Yes.
Okay, is there any further discussion on the matter? Okay, hearing no further discussion, I'll turn to Parliamentarian Johnson. I'll restate the motion. The motion on the floor is for the chairperson of the Reparations Task Force to be the official spokesperson for the task force with due communication to task force members about other media opportunities. Parliamentarian Johnson, you can go do a roll call vote. Excuse me. Thank you.
I'll begin with Chair Moore.
Aye.
Vice Chair Brown,
Aye.
Member Bradford,
Aye.
Member Bradford votes aye. Member Grills? Member Grills abstains. Member Holder? Member Holder votes aye. Member Lewis? Member Lewis votes, excuse me, aye. Member Tamaki?
Aye.
Member Tamaki votes aye. Member Montgomery Step?
Aye.
Member Montgomery Step votes aye. Madam Chair, there were 8 members voting. There were 7 ayes and 1 abstention.
Thank you, Parliamentarian Johnson. There are 7 ayes, 1 abstention. The ayes have it, and the motion carries. So now we'll go back to who will comprise of the Advisory Board Committee. And I'd like to entertain a motion for the Advisory Board Committee to consist of myself and Member Montgomery Stepp.
I move that Member Montgomery Stepp, chairperson.
Is there a second? Okay, hearing no second, I'd like to entertain a motion about who will comprise the Advisory Board Committee for the communication strategy.
I would make the motion that the 2 individuals who have done it this far, Dr. Grills, and okay, she says no, so I would think. And then Chair Moore then, okay? Dr. Grills and Chair Moore should comprise the advisory task force.
Okay, it has been properly moved by Senator Bradford and seconded by Member Scott Lewis that the Advisory Board Committee to develop and implement a communication strategy is comprised of Member Grills and myself. Is there any discussion on the matter? Okay, hearing no further discussion, I'll turn to Parliamentarian Johnson to cue a roll call vote.
Thank you. I will begin with Chair Moore.
Aye.
Chair Moore votes aye. Vice Chair Brown?
Aye.
Vice Chair Brown votes aye. Member Bradford?
Aye.
Member Bradford votes aye. Member Grills? Member Grills votes aye. Member Holder? Member Holder votes aye. Member Lewis? Member Lewis votes aye. Member Tamaki?
Aye.
Member Tamaki votes aye. Member Montgomery Stepp?
Aye.
Member Montgomery Stepp votes aye. Madam Chair, there were 8 members present and voting. There were 8 ayes and 0 nays.
Thank you, Parliamentarian Johnson. So there are 8 ayes and 0 nays, and so the ayes have it and the motion carries. So the Communications Advisory Board Committee will consist of myself and Member Grills. So, Member Grills, is there any other information, updates for this agenda item? Okay, so we are scheduled for a 15-minute break, and then we'll return for action item number 20, which is schedule of future meetings with members Moore and Lewis.
So if you were to bring the black share of wealth at least to the black share of the population, it would require an additional at least $10 trillion.
regarding
Mr. Damon Brown, did you want to update us on the task force members?
Sure. Members of the task force, as you know, we've attempted to poll the task force for their availability for the next meeting based on the prior adopted meeting schedule, as well as a potential change to that schedule. And so we were looking at availability for the months of July, July and August. At this point, we have had difficulty in finding the availability to establish a quorum during that time frame. And so we were going to continue our efforts in polling the task force members and also seeking availability for the month of September, so that we can try to find a time when at least a quorum can be established. And so based on that availability issue, one of the things that I was going to suggest to the task force is perhaps taking a look at the agenda at the appropriate time on today's agenda, what would have been the proposed next meeting agenda, and then making that approved subject to DOJ's determination of a date when a quorum can be established. So the task force would essentially adopt the substance of the agenda, but leave the date for the meeting to be determined based on our ability to find a quorum.
Thank you. So I think one of the first things we need to establish is how the task force members feel about having our next meeting in the month of September. Yeah. I'm good.
The only concern with that, and I understand the reasoning, but in terms of the celebration of the report, it'll be old news by September. So we may miss an opportunity to really engage the public around the content of the first report or the interim report.
Any?
So my question is, if we could possibly schedule something, if the DOJ could work with us to schedule something, let's say for June 1, where perhaps it's not a meeting per se, but some kind of gathering of the task force members to at least celebrate the release of the report. So we're not talking about, the procurement of witnesses, that level of orchestration, just gathering us together in a place so that we can commemorate the release of the report without it constituting, some formal meeting with a full agenda.
I do think that presents an opportunity perhaps to engage with some of the community organizations, and that maybe we can work in collaboration to establish some sort of event that is not a public meeting, where there wouldn't necessarily be business conducted, but there could be an acknowledgement that the report has been published. We can certainly work towards perhaps facilitating that.
Have any thoughts on that?
Vice Chair Brown, you're recognized.
I would like to offer a motion that we would meet in June, appropriate time, that we would consider Los Angeles our meeting venue site.
Thank you. So is there a second? It has been properly moved by Vice Chair Brown and properly seconded by Senator Bradford that the task force has a meeting on June 1 or a gathering on June 1 to celebrate the report and in Los Angeles. Is there any discussion on the matter, on the motion?
Madam Chair, I just wanted to make a point of clarification that it would not be a meeting,
Right. Okay.
but some
Mhm.
event that
Event.
is intended to celebrate the release of the report.
Thank you for that additional clarification. Any other discussion on the motion? So, Vice Chair, you said a potentially an evening meeting? Gathering, sorry.
Event, yeah.
An evening gathering on a Wednesday, June 1st. Yes, Member Tamaki, you're recognized.
So also, this is one of those things that the advisory committee would be communicating with the communications consultant, because they would have a good sense of what would best fit the news cycle that we don't want to miss. And they're very aware of, broadcast and go to public timing. So, but in general, I agree about the accessibility by the public, but this is an event that we can't miss because it's a big deliverable task force.
Chair Moore, if I can just ask, because this is sort of just coming to us now, if there is some flexibility in terms of the date, perhaps if it's not exactly on June 1st, but certainly sometime close to the date that it's released. I'm also aware of the fact that I know that Los Angeles was suggested as the next meeting location, but perhaps the Capitol in Sacramento is a facility that we could use for free. I'm also thinking in terms of the logistics of it all, that might be a location that we could use. And certainly we can coordinate with the task force as we start kind of planning things to make sure that the location and the date work for folks. I just want to get a little bit of flexibility to be able to put this together.
Okay, so flexibility on the location for the gathering. Is there any other discussion?
I
You
can-
wanna
I
withdraw
would
the
like to
motion?
suggest that we move expeditiously nail down, this has been a convenient time, that is held in the evening, and there's one site there that would accommodate a whole lot of people, and in keeping with the tradition of the church, the faith community, St. Paul's Baptist Church has more than enough space to accommodate us. It's available. Remember that first meeting about that mule, that acre, 40 acres. It was 20 black preachers who met with General Sherman. January the 12th, 1865. In the evening.
Okay, so I know there's a motion on the floor that has Los Angeles as the affixed location. So I don't know if Vice Chair Brown, you would want to withdraw your motion and then someone would withdraw the second, and then you could reintroduce a motion that allows for some flexibility in the location.
All right, I will.
There's, who? Senator Bradford,
Bradford.
you can withdraw your second. Thank you. So then now we can reintroduce a motion for gathering on June 1 in the evening with some flexibility with the location. Anyone would like to? Did you say flexibility in the date as well?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yes.
So you're suggesting Sacramento. You were suggesting Sacramento.
Well,
right?
I just mentioned the Capitol because I know there won't be any cost associated with using the facility. And to Dr. Brown's point, I know that it will be large enough of a facility to accommodate a large crowd of people.
I wanted to have clarified what facility you were thinking of when you suggested Sacramento.
It's the task force's call, but I just was suggesting that that's an option to have it at the Capitol.
All right. So yeah, at the Capitol. Okay.
I would suggest it be in the hood at St. Paul.
Yes, I remember Tamaki, you're recognized.
So, I think the idea about having it in the hood. I would just say that the one significance of this report is that it's issued by the state of California, as the imprimatur of the state of California. And so, again, to capitalize on that monumental importance of the first state and the only state so far to issue what is going to be a very damning report on the history that's happened and buried history and history that is a subject of willful amnesia. The complicity of the state of California in that, it's kind of a good contrast and also a point of pride, that it be held at the Capitol. But I defer to, the will of the task force and respectfully to Pastor Brown also. I don't want to not recognize that.
We have,
recognized.
Madam Chair, Brother Tamaki, we haven't got into the promised land yet. The battle is not over. We shouldn't shout too soon. And my spirit and suggestion is the birthing of freedom began outside of Caesar's palace, not in the palace.
More?
Yes, Member Jovan Scott Lewis, you're recognized.
So just because we haven't gotten to the actual schedule for the next several months, what I will note is that perhaps could we scroll down to December, please. Okay, November. Okay, so November. So we do have Sacramento on the schedule in the following months. At which point we could absolutely go with Dr. Brown's recommendation of location at that time, because the DOJ and those involved with the logistics will have ample time to prepare that site. I think what the DOJ is worried about is the fact that they will be, I imagine, working right up until the last minute to prepare the report for the June 1 release, and adding any additional logistical challenges might complicate things in preparation for the actual release of the report. So having the June 1 meeting at the Capitol actually reduces the burden logistically. So I would recommend that we do the June 1 meeting at the Capitol, and then we hold the Sacramento meeting at the location you're recommending, Dr. Brown, for our Sacramento-based meeting in the following months, in the spirit of compromise.
Okay, so there's no motion on the floor as of yet. So if anyone would like to entertain a motion related to the gathering in June, that takes into account what we've just discussed, we can do that.
I move that we have a meeting, sorry.
Gathering.
Yeah, I know, I caught it. Feeling the embarrassment. I don't normally do this much talk. I move that we have a gathering to celebrate the release of the interim report on June 1 at the Capitol. June 1-ish? No, we can't do June 1-ish. Okay. The first week of, okay.
Or
June 1-ish?
Flexibility.
Okay, I move that we have a gathering to celebrate the release of the interim report in the capital in the first few days of June.
Is there a second? So it has been properly moved by member Scott Lewis and properly seconded by member Montgomery Stepp that the task force hosts a gathering to celebrate the release of the interim report at the state capitol in Sacramento in the first week of June. Is there any discussion on the matter? Hearing no further discussion, I'll turn to Parliamentarian Johnson for a roll call vote.
Thank you. I'll begin with Chair Moore,
Aye.
Vice Chair Brown,
Yes.
Member Bradford.
Aye.
Member Bradford voted aye. Member Grills. Member Grills votes aye. Member Holder. Member Holder votes aye. Member Lewis.
Aye.
Member Lewis votes aye. Member Tamaki.
Aye.
Member Tamaki votes aye. Member Montgomery Stepp. Member Montgomery Stepp votes aye. Madam Chair, there were 8 members present and voting. There were 8 ayes and 0 nays.
Thank you. There are 8 ayes and 0 nays, so the ayes have it and the motion carries. Member Scott Lewis, you can proceed.
Confirm that that's the version of the agenda of the schedule that you sent, like when you were last version.
It's not, because the schedule that I sent, it was every other month and not. Go down a bit more? Yes, please, so we can.
Updated version should have Sacramento in December.
I just sent it to Damon, Alicia, Michael, and Kat. Need it to be in front of your inbox. Yeah, it's fine. So I just resent the newest version. Yes, to Michael, Kat, Damon, and Alicia. Should I send it to anyone else for now? Yes, I resent it right now to Alicia, Kat, Damon, and Michael. I can send it to more people, whoever's controlling the screen. Yeah, that should be one. No, that's correct. If you scroll down, we'll confirm that it's the right one. Ooh. So I'll send it to Noel, but I sent the correct version to the 4 people mentioned. I'll send this directly to Noel right now, but that's still not the right one. It's labeled 3.29 future hearings. Yes, but it needs to say December 2023, Sacramento. Not. Oh yeah, that is it. That's it. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. So then could we scroll back up to, August, there we go. So then now that we have voted to gather in the first few days of June at the state capitol, we need to agree to the next meeting date for, well, not the date per se, but agree to have our next meeting in September. As Damon Brown indicated, task force members could not establish a quorum in the months of July or August, so we need to meet in September. Do we need a motion to agree to meet in September?
Yes.
We do?
Okay, so given that we have not been able to establish a quorum in July and August, we can entertain a motion to have our next task force meeting in September.
Second.
Okay, so it has been properly moved by Member Montgomery Stepp and properly seconded by Vice Chair Brown that our next official task force hearing will occur in September of 2022. Is there any discussion on the matter? Okay, so how solidifying particular dates?
And we need the location. Yeah. I move to amend the motion that we meet, we're gonna meet. Yeah, so it'll be a meeting that we meet in September in Los Angeles.
Is there a second for the amendment? So it's been properly moved by Javon Scott Lewis, members Javon Scott Lewis, and properly seconded by Member Grills that we amend the motion to include Los Angeles as a location for our next hearing, which will occur in September of 2022.
For ease of reference, could you just withdraw the first motion and make the motion so that you don't have to vote on the amendment?
Yeah. Withdraw the second. Thank you. Okay.
Okay.
So we'll restate. Well, you have to restate the motion again.
I move that we hold our next meeting in September in Los Angeles.
Is there a second? Properly moved by Member Scott Lewis and properly seconded by Member Grills that our next hearing will occur in September 22 in Los Angeles. Is there any discussion on the matter? Okay. Hearing no further discussion, I'll turn to Parliamentarian Johnson to stop. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Madam Chair.
Aye.
Madam Chair votes aye. Vice Chair Brown.
Aye.
Vice Chair Brown votes aye. Member Bradford. Aye. Member Bradford votes aye. Member Grills. Member Grills votes aye. Member Holder. Aye. Member Holder votes aye. Member Lewis.
Aye.
Member Lewis votes aye. Member Tamaki. Member Tamaki votes aye. Member Montgomery Stepp. Member Montgomery Stepp votes aye. Madam Chair, There were 8 members voting. There were 8 ayes and 0 nays.
Thank you. There are 8 ayes and 0 nays, and the ayes have it, so the motion carries. Our next task force hearing will occur on September 22, 2022 in Los Angeles. Member Scott Lewis, you can proceed.
Okay, thank you. So what Chair Moore and I want from the task force is effectively to agree to the schedule for the remaining life of the task force, meaning the months of meeting and their locations, and then to secondly agree to the topics of discussion for those meetings. And so if we can reference so the question is, do the task force members actually have this, the task force members do not have direct access to the correct schedule. That should be assumed, right? Okay, so then if we could please very slowly scroll through the schedule on the screen so that the task force members may become familiar with what we're proposing. Noting that the August meeting is now a September meeting. Member Holder's asking if you could email that to the task force members, updated schedule, please.
Since we will be meeting in Sacramento in June, and there may be parts of the state that we haven't gotten to, might we consider December somewhere other than Sacramento?
So these are just mere recommendations. So as the advisory committee, we basically came up with the locations based upon prior discussion about how we wanted to have meetings represent the various areas of the state, effectively Northern California, Southern California, and the Central Valley. And we tried to attend to the responsibilities provided or asked of us by AB 3121 and to effectively spread them out over the remaining meetings. And based upon the responsibilities, we decided on a proposed schedule, meaning how many months and how much time in between those months so as to give the DOJ adequate preparation time between each meeting. However, the locations or their schedules are not set in stone, mere recommendations, which is why I'm asking for you all to review.
They just sent it. Thank you. Okay, so we know that some of the logistics will be subject to change given what we just voted on, but do you want to talk about maybe the substance?
So as I mentioned, we went through AB 3121, looked at the scope of responsibility or scope of work, if you will, for the task force, and we tried to apportion that throughout the remaining number of meetings that we have in the life of the task force leading up to summer of 2023. What I will note is that because we've been on Blue Jeans for the past several months, we agreed that we would take the whole course of the 10 available meetings set forth in the bill and assign each an in-person meeting. However, based upon the way that Chair Moore and I divided the remaining responsibilities for the task force, we ended up with only seven meetings. So we have 3 remaining and unaccounted for meetings effectively. So that's something that the task force can also take into consideration. So, again, I would just refer you to the proposed schedule to look at what we are suggesting we discuss. We wanted to, first of all, begin with, in the September meeting, what's now agreed to the September meeting, to discussing forms of reparations and comparative models. Because AB 3121 asks that we produce something that comports to international standard, or that at least, is drafted in reference to existing and recognized standards for reparations. We wanted to then devote the following meeting to discussing the issue of restitution and restoration. Following that, we wanted to turn our attention to the direct issue of compensation. The meetings following the compensation meeting would effectively give us enough time to actually think of our recommendations. Because what Chair Moore and I were concerned about was that we would go through these meetings and not have enough time to adequately deliberate on what we were recommending ultimately in the final report. And so we decided to have two meetings, what we're calling Reparations Recommendations Part 1 and Reparations Recommendations Part 2, to provide the task force with ample time to, with sincerity and with due diligence, consider what we are recommending before making a formal recommendation to the state.
Thank you. Is there any questions, comments? So looking to you, Member Scott Lewis. See, how do you like to proceed given this new information we decided on in terms of the September hearing and how that impacts the schedule?
So I think one of the first things I'd like for us to consider and decide on is if the actual locations are adequately representative according to the task force's views. Meaning, are there cities, are there regions of the state that Chair Moore and I missed, overlooked, that you would like to have represented? And again, I'll add that we actually do have 3 additional meetings to which we can, assign topics and locations.
And I'll just cite the locations: Los Angeles, Allensworth, Bakersfield, Sacramento, San Diego, Oakland, and Inglewood. And there would be an opportunity for 3 more locations, as Member Scott Lewis mentioned. Also, I don't know, I asked if Member Reggie Jones Sawyer is here because, he did introduce legislation 2296 to extend the task force for another year. But in looking at that legislation, I don't think that he also extended the amount of times we could meet. So as Member Jovan Scott Lewis said, in the statute, AB 3121, we are able to meet up to 10 times and being able to be reimbursed. But with the new legislation that Member Reggie Jones Sawyer adopted, it extends the task force for another year, but it doesn't extend the number of times we can have reimbursable meetings. So putting that out there, that could be a potential issue if 2296 actually passes.
Madam Chair, maybe premature for me to speak to this, but as one individual, I'm very much opposed to that idea of extending this task force.
Excuse me, a point of order, that's not on the agenda. So you really need to reserve that conversation and agendize it for the next meeting, because you really should not be discussing that now.
Yeah, but this is no official action.
Well,
Yeah,
you're.
This is no official action.
It isn't, but you're discussing something that you can take official action on.
We are
No,
not
it's
taking an
We're
action
not
on it.
taking any action. I'm clarifying how that legislation could impact this future hearings proposal. It's completely in line with the discussion. We're not taking any action. I was just bringing up a point of clarification, making sure that every single task force member is aware of how this legislation, if passed imminently, could impact this. That's it. Okay, so back to Member Scott Lewis.
Thank you. So did we miss anywhere? Are there any locations that you'd like added to the schedule? Are there any locations that you would like removed from the schedule? Or alternatively, would you like to reorder the locations in the existing schedule? Member Grills mentioned something about Sacramento. But this is one of the things that we're willing to entertain right now, so we can decide.
I'll just add, I know we took off the Inland Empire. I forgot why, but in the event that we have additional hearings, which we probably will, I'll offer as an additional suggestion somewhere in the Inland Empire, because I don't think that's present or reflected in the current proposal right now.
So maybe another way to put this is, would you like for us to schedule all of the 10 available meetings to us? Okay. So then we have 3 additional meetings, meaning we have 3 additional location opportunities. So one of those locations for one of those meetings will be an Empire. Are there any other recommendations for the 2 other meetings? Yeah.
That's the area.
Yeah, I know. But the only reason I ask is because they are actively doing their own, not their own, but they're doing reparations efforts. And so to be able to celebrate in places that are actively working, would be a nice gesture and would probably increase community participation if they're already time and doing that. That's just going that out.
I would say to that point, for the Southern California, maybe Compton, that's where a lot of Black people are, or in the Bay Area, like Vallejo or something like that, or Richmond. Watts.
How many is that?
Yeah. One side of Compton, I would say Carson, because a lot of Black people actually aren't in Compton anymore. Compton, Carson. So Carson and the Empire, you said Marin City.
Because I think as the advisory committee, we can take away these recommendations.
Yeah.
Then come up with a new proposed schedule. And then what we would do is then take the top side. We can then take the suggested items and reapportion them according to those 10 meetings. And agendize approving the schedule at the
September hearing?
At the September hearing.
Okay. And in this future hearings proposal, we alternated the hearings. So from now on, starting from September, we are proposing that the hearings would be every other month, correct?
Right, but we'll have to see how we
How
can
we
schedule
do.
the 10 meeting. Well,
Oh, yeah,
the
before the
remaining 9 meetings after September, between September and the summer. So we'll go away and do that, and then. I mean, perhaps what would be helpful is if then the content of the meetings, if there's anything, if you look at the headings of the currently proposed meetings, is there a subject or topic that you think also needs to be added? Because now that we have these extra 3 meetings, we now have the scope to add more topics, or Chair Moore and I could simply redistribute the existing topics across the 10 meetings. But because we have space, I'd like to extend an opportunity to the task force to suggest additional meeting topics.
And can you clarify where these topics came from? Just for people to know.
So I mentioned they came from the bill, right? So if you see that there, in the bill, there's a section where we have stated outcomes, right? What we're meant to do. This is where those have come from.
Member Gross, you recognize.
I have one topic suggestion. Since we have about 5 or 6 cities and counties in the state that are also either currently doing or close to launching their own reparations effort, we might actually hold a task force meeting that invites them
Perfect.
to specifically address where they're at, how they're seeing what we're coming up with and doing, and how we may need to coordinate.
Thank you, Member Gross. I was going to suggest that I was speaking with Friday Jones earlier, who I think is gone. We were discussing the fact that there are so many cities and various municipalities throughout the state. I mean, even here in the East Bay, you have Berkeley, you have Oakland, San Francisco, you have City of Hayward. Each are launching their own reparations initiatives, and so it would be perfect for us to also get feedback from what they're doing and to just have an opportunity to liaise with them. Thank you.
Okay, great. All right, if there aren't any other questions, comments, this was listed as a potential action item. So we already came to the conclusion that we'll go away and do the work. So we'll move on. The next item on the agenda, which is agenda item number 21, action item, agenda for the next meeting. Attorney Brown?
Thank you, Chair Moore. You see on the screen the post agenda for the next meeting. Again, because we are still trying to determine the availability of the task force in September, we're not actually labeling this as an agenda associated with any particular meeting date, but we'd like for you to take a look at the substance and indicate your approval or any changes that you'd like to make to the topics that are slated for discussion. Trini, if you could advance the slides.
Thank you. So is there any discussion, well, I'd like to entertain a motion related to the agenda, draft agenda as presented.
I move the draft.
So you move to approve the draft agenda as presented. Okay. It has been properly moved by Vice Chair Brown and properly seconded by Senator Bradford that we approve the agenda as presented. However, now we'll move to discussion. But as presented, it says July. So we need to just clarify that it's going to be in June.
No, this would be the September agenda. This would be the September agenda.
Okay, well,
June
on the
is-
September agenda, if it's the
Right.
September agenda,
So
then
then
why
this
is
is-
number 4 say celebration of the report?
Well, because this is the only agenda that, so prior to our discussion moments ago, this was, I think, the most information that we had. So then we need to reconfigure the agenda.
Yeah. The September agenda needs to adhere to future hearing proposal. And this looks like, I don't know. Okay, so you just withdraw the motion. And you withdraw your second, Senator Bradford. Okay.
Chair Moore, I couldn't quite hear you, but I thought you had asked about the future hearing proposals. That's currently listed, I believe, at the end of this agenda, on day 2. It's listed as number 17. I don't know if you want to move that in place of item number
4 of day 1.
4. And then we can make other adjustments subject to the approval of the chair and the vice chair once we finalize everything. But in terms of the substance, we can certainly omit number 4 and then make other adjustments.
Number 6 for day 1 would also have to be omitted because number 6 says discussion and potential action item preliminary recommendation. So that would be moot as of September.
And if there are any other items that the task force wishes to include in the report, you can also suggest those at this time.
I'm thinking that we still need number 6, because although the report will contain the preliminary recommendations, next steps is to begin the process, begin to really fill those out and expand them. That's how I read that bullet.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so we can keep 6. So essentially to clarify, at the September hearing, we would be discussing the preliminary recommendations in the interim report.
I mean, that's the actual commencement of the reparation discussion.
Makes sense, yeah. Thank you for that.
Chair,
Yes, you recognize.
And then in our proposed schedule, we have for the September meeting, alongside the discussion of comparative reparations models, the second point is to discuss how recommendations comport with standards. So there is a context for discussing recommendations according to our existing schedule.
So we can entertain, well, okay, so we already decided that our next substantive hearing will be September 2022 in Los Angeles, and we ratified the subjects already to talk about comparative reparations models. Okay, so essentially, we already ratified or approved. That's a timber hearing. We're going to discuss comparative reparations models, essentially inviting people to discuss domestic and international human rights law, so we can begin a conversation about how our recommendations must comport with international human rights law standards. So, is there any action, any motion that we need to entertain for this? Attorney Brown?
Chairman, are you saying that you'd like to add that description from the proposal of the meetings, perhaps in substitute of this discussion of the report?
Yes.
Okay.
So do we need to make a motion on that, given that we already ratified the content for September 22?
Yes, you've modified it, what was presented by the committee, the advisory committee. So you would need a motion.
Okay. So entertain a motion to substitute agenda item 4, which would have been a celebration of the report and discussion of report findings, with a discussion on the forms of reparations and comparative models, where we would discuss domestic international law and begin a conversation about how our recommendations must comport with international standards for remedy and wrongs. Anyone like to entertain a motion related to that substitution?
So moved.
Second.
So it has been properly moved by Member Scott Lewis and seconded by Vice Chair Brown that we would substitute agenda item 4, which would have been a celebration of report and discussion of the report findings, with a discussion on the forms of reparations and comparative models of reparations under domestic and international human rights law. Is there any discussion on the matter?
I would just recommend that we give it more than 2 hours.
I agree. Okay, we can. Is there any other discussion on the motion that's on the floor in terms of the substitution of the substance? Okay, hearing no further discussion, I'll turn to Parliamentarian Johnson for a roll call vote.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will begin with Madam Chair.
Aye.
Madam Chair votes aye. Vice Chair Brown.
Aye.
Vice Chair Brown votes aye. Member Bradford. Member Bradford votes aye. Member Grills. Member Grills votes aye. Member Lewis.
Aye.
Member Lewis votes aye. Member Holder.
Aye.
Member Holder votes aye. Member Tamaki. Member Tamaki votes aye. Member Montgomery Stepp.
Aye.
Member Montgomery Stepp votes aye. Madam Chair, there were 8 members present and voting. There were 8 ayes and 0 nays.
Thank you. There are 8 ayes and 0 nays. The ayes have it and the motion carries. So we will substitute agenda item 4 with a discussion on comparative models under international and domestic human rights law. So now we can deal with the timing. So Member Holder, you suggested that we extend that conversation to last for more than the allotted time as presented. I want to turn to Tamaki because item 6, discussion on the preliminary recommendations, is slotted for 2 hours. I just want to get your opinion. Do you think that is enough time to discuss those preliminary recommendations? Do you think they could be shortened to account for additional time for discussion on domestic and international human rights law, as Holder suggested? Or do you have any alternative suggestions for how to accommodate Holder's recommendation without taking away from the 2-hour discussion for agenda item number 6?
sorry, so just on clarification, Chair Moore, the discussion basically is because we're retaining agenda item 6, how do we allocate time as between that and the discussion of the standards of reparations? Is that it?
Yes, with the caveat that Holder just stated that she believes that the conversation on human rights law should be more than the allotted time of 10 to 12 p.m. Last one.
It's because I envisioned that we're going
Yeah, so I haven't thought this through. So, and I'm just going off of what the existing agenda was. And so it occurred to me that the approval of the preliminary recommendations with emphasis on preliminary was that at some point we would take those up and begin to expand them and discuss the topics, point by point, so that at some point they become final. And so it appeared on the September agenda. So I was wondering, well, maybe that is appropriate, but maybe it is also a question of timing and sequence. Bearing in mind that the economists are going to start with their economic analysis on housing, because racism in housing has led to evils in the other areas, including environment, including jobs, including transit, including schools, that seemed to be a logical place to start. So again, looking at it through a little bit different lens, the lens of the economists, maybe that is a better way than approaching commencing of the topic of reparations on the items listed in 6. The other consideration is maybe we need to set the standards, boundaries, and the parameters and metrics for what has the precedence of reparations first before we then start getting into the detail of either of those items listed in 6 or how the economists are approaching it. So if the issue is a matter of threshold, where do we start and what precedents we look at, maybe that takes precedent. In other words, we look to domestic and international, and we basically define the universe there, and then begin to unpack the recommendations. And with respect to the recommendations, we're now talking about what the actual reparations will start to look like. And then maybe we then start with what the economists are sequencing. Then as they sequence those, we're going to get to the items listed in 6. So that's kind of a roundabout way of figuring the agenda, but I think that might be going from the very broad, defining the boundaries in the universe, to then getting into the more details of what reparations looks like. And it seems to me by then we should have some guidance from the economists, start their analysis on housing as a jumping off point with numbers. And then from there we can go into the items listed in agenda number 6. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Does any of the members want witnesses on any of these topics? It's the message I'm getting from the DOJ. Member Tamaki can start with that based on what you outlined.
Well, we do need the economists to come back, for sure. I would think in September, number 1. And then maybe member Scott Lewis and Chair Moore would be in touch with them in between, because for a long period of time between now and September, see what they've got developed. That will in turn inform what witnesses that we would call, that would then in turn support their analysis if they begin, for example, in measuring the harm of housing and the destruction of entire communities. So some of the witnesses we've had already, but maybe they would have witnesses that would help augment their testimony on the actual monetary damages and the loss of wealth and opportunity. That might, again, I'm just sort of spinning this stuff out because I had not thought about it, but that's sort of my preliminary thinking.
Yeah, I'd like to offer as a witness, we're going to discuss international human rights law, that we invite the International Center for Transitional Justice. They consult with many different entities on a governmental level regarding reparations programs. So they would be a really great expert witness to help facilitate the discussion on that. Any other? Ms. Member Holder, you're recognized.
Yeah, I'm just concerned that 4 and 6 on the same day is too much.
Yeah.
I think we need a substantial amount of time to wait for number 4. That's a critical framework that we have to unpack. So I think that day needs to be dedicated to number 4. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Do you want me to repeat it, or? I think it's okay. I think.
Yes, so essentially, Member Holder said she thinks that the first day for the September hearing should be dedicated to number 4, which would be discussing international human rights law standards. And then maybe the second day, we can have a conversation on the scope of work with the economists, the subpoena update, and then a discussion on the preliminary recommendations. So would anyone like to entertain a motion related to what we just discussed? Okay, so again, I'll just reiterate what was just communicated by Member Holder. I just minimize distractions so we can actually finish this. I think we still have a point. Okay, so just to recommunicate what Member Holder stated, that agenda, the first day should be centralized on the discussion of human rights law, so we have enough time to discuss. And I think the second day, incorporating what Don Tamaki said, we could invite the economists to speak and then also have a substantive conversation around the preliminary recommendations. So at this time, do you want to entertain a motion on the September agenda?
I'm happy to do that.
Okay, great. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, so it has been properly moved by Member Montgomery Stepp and seconded by Vice Chair Brown that for the first day of the September hearing, the first day will be dedicated to a conversation on human rights law and international law frameworks for reparations. On the second day, we'll have a day dedicated to inviting the experts, economists to come speak, and then also having a discussion on the preliminary recommendations and the subpoena update, schedule of future meetings, and those things will still remain. Is there any discussion on the matter? Okay, hearing no further discussion, I'll turn to Parliamentarian Johnson for a roll call vote.
Thank you. I will begin the vote by calling Madam Chair.
Aye.
Madam Chair votes aye. Vice Chair Brown.
Aye.
Vice Chair Brown votes aye. Member Bradford. Member Bradford votes aye. Member Grills. Member Grills votes aye. Member Holder.
Aye.
Member Holder votes aye. Member Lewis. Member Lewis votes aye. Member Tamaki.
Aye.
Member Tamaki votes aye. Member Montgomery Steppe?
Aye.
Member Montgomery Steppe votes aye. Madam Chair, there were 8 members present and voting. There were 8 ayes and 0 nays.
Thank you, Parliamentarian Johnson. There were 8 ayes and 0 nays. The ayes have it and the motion carries. The next item of business is number 22, potential action item, unfinished business. Attorney Brown, is there any unfinished business?
The only item I think is some clarification on the African American and Black terms.
Yes, go ahead.
One of the things we wanted to make sure was clear on the motion, and there was some discussion about this to the extent that some of the data and some of the citations reference the term Black, that we would keep that consistent with the sources from which we derived or obtained that information, and that the advisory committee that was formed can massage the changes to African American in other places in the report that keeps those parameters in mind.
Great, thank you for that clarification. So, thank you so much. I'll turn to Vice Chair Brown in the event that he has any closing remarks. Thank you so much for offering this historic church for our first in-person hearing. Without further ado, Vice Chair Brown.
Madam Chair, members of the task force, we are very much grateful for the manner in which you, the task force, have conducted people's business. We're looking forward to our next meeting as we continue the struggle that should have been fulfilled a long time ago for us to receive our God-given entitlement, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Hopefully through this measure that will be supported by fair thinking people, we shall reap the victory. Thank you. Safe travels. We look forward to seeing you at the next meeting.
Thank you. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
So if you were to bring the Black share of wealth at least to the Black share of the population, it would require an additional at least $10 trillion.